Hello, this is Stephen Haylestrom, and let's talk housing, coming to you from 92.7 FM Trent Radio in Peterborough, Ontario. Thank you very much for joining me today. We have a new time slot, Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Sorry for the change over there. Just thought it all worked better with the rearranging of the schedule that happens once in a while. And it certainly is helpful to me because it changes my deadline for the recording of this. So I end up with the weekend to finish, which is great for my schedule. So thank you, everyone. The podcast will still be available in its usual place, and I look forward to hearing from everyone and anyone anytime. I'm always looking for people to interview and topics to talk about as far as housing goes. Today, I have an interview with with a friend of mine, Murray Pollard, and Murray's an interesting guy. You'll get to meet him in a little while. And one of the things I'll tell you about right up front is I am in Los Angeles, California, recording this as of right now. Sitting, looking, and if I look to my right, I can actually see the building for Universal Studios and the Harry Potter exhibit. So my youngest daughter, who is here with us, is going to be enjoying that later on in the week. And we're having a few days off, but also I am attending for my regular day job. I am attending a symposium in Los Angeles that is called Modular Affordable Housing. Modular for Affordable Housing, Los Angeles, unlocking the greater potential of modular homes. I was invited some months ago to come and speak, and I'm actually chairing the second day of the symposium. And it's really quite a wide array of people, all focused on using modular technology to build affordable housing faster and more energy efficient and more effectively. So I'm talking on the second day and sharing, and my discussion is really focused on fast tracking projects. And I'm a big proponent of what's called open source software. So many of you may have heard of that. That's where you have basically the programmers all join together and create software that's available to everyone at no cost. So you have open source, document software. Instead of paying for Word, you can get open source software to do your documents in, etc. And there's open source software for a variety of different things. And some time ago, I envisioned the idea of open source design for modular housing. So one of the big costs and delays in building new housing is that normally what happens is you have an architect who designs your new building and charges for that design, and then they make it their own. And in reality, certainly in Canada, the architect ends up owning that design. So if it's the perfect design that's energy efficient and great and works really well and economic and everything else, the architect ends up owning that design. So that design, which might include different components or different ideas, different things that become proprietary to that architect. So I envision the idea of open source design specifically for modular and specifically in order to be able to bring more people into modular construction so that they then have an opportunity. So instead of having to start from scratch and learn how to design and how to build effectively and efficiently modular housing product, they could go and get designs and then change them a little bit to make them look like what they want them to, or create some, their own creativity added to it. So they don't all look the same, but the basic stuff, meaning the connection, the way the modular units connect with each other, the way standardized size, wall structures, all of the architectural elements become standardized and therefore are available at no cost to anyone who wants to use them. And this is done by basically utilizing people to work together at no cost, on little parts of this design to create, an open source type design. The same thing is done, for example, right now in recording this episode, I use a piece of software called Audacity, and it is an open source audio editor. So it's a piece of software, free. You get it on the internet and download it. It's free, and it has a lot of the same features that the that audio editing software has that that costs you whatever amount of money. Instead of using GarageBand or some other product that you need to pay for, you can use Audacity at no charge, and it uses crowdsourced software management, just like Wikipedia, crowdsourced information. So people join and then work to create this piece of software. And what I am attempting to do is to do the same thing for designs and for the detailed designs for modular products. So that's what my particular talk is about at this conference. Don't mind the background music, please, or background noise. I'm sitting on my friend's balcony, and I apologize for that background noise. It is Los Angeles, so there's always traffic. So, just to start things going, in just a moment, we're going to hear from my friend Murray. He's now retired, lives in Hollywood, and he volunteers at a food bank and does a lot, has a really solid understanding of what's happening for people, both people who are struggling in California and in Hollywood and Los Angeles in particular, and really has a clear understanding of it. Along with him is his wife Patricia. You'll hear her a little bit during this, and my wife MJ. We're basically sitting around the table talking about the challenge that's going on here. So just to get things going, next voice you'll hear will be Murray and I starting our conversation. Thank you.
So you were just talking about food insecurity, first off, and then just about general stuff. So tell me, how's it going here in LA?
Well, I volunteer at a food bank that this particular one is open from on Mondays and Fridays, and the numbers are increasing at a dramatic rate. We allow people we have a drive-through lane, they can come, or they're walking in or taking a bike. Frequently, we'll have a car roll up and they're getting orders for 4 people because the other people don't have a car and no way to carry things back. So we provide cooking meals for either cooking or those who have no facilities to cook, whether they're living on the street or in a tent, or they're renting a room in a house or an apartment, but they don't have the facilities to actually make anything. So we provide meals that will work for those type of situations. Frequently, we have more and more people because of strikes that are going on, increasing costs that the income is not keeping up to what is going on with the food prices. And and sadly I see things which really disturb me. At a grocery store, the price of a bag of chips is $1.99. Must buy 4, otherwise it's $5.99. Well, people can't do that because they can't afford $5.99 to buy all these chips. And this extrapolates out over not just potato chips, but a lot of other products. which to me just seems, inhuman on the grocery departments doing that.
And yet the grocery chains, certainly in Canada, just recently, the grocery chains, the like the presidents, the CEOs of the big grocery chains were called to Ottawa to meet with the prime minister, where he was supposed to scold them for all of their profit because their profits are soaring, but yet the prices, and they keep saying, well, the price keeps going up, but anyway, I don't even understand that at all. And if I can just refocus, so the other thing that you were talking about, and Patricia was talking about, your wife who's here with us too, is about the housing situation too, and about the so you're getting an increase in people having to use the food bank, which means that, okay, they might have a place to live, but they're having to spend so much money on the cost of their living, of their place to live, that then they can't afford food, and so they have to come to you. And these are regular people. Often people think, when they think of homeless people, they think of just the drug addict, or the whatever, like somebody who's really down and out. And it seems to me that that population is really changing.
It is changed substantially from what I see. Uh, Almost all the people we deal with are going through a financial crisis of some kind, and it could be increasing rent, which is pretty frequent. If you have rent protection, that's great. That means the landlord can only raise the rent a certain amount. Can't just add 10% to it. But if you are on a fixed income, or your wages are not increasing, a 3 or 4% increase can be putting you out of your home. And so then you have food insecurities and insecurities with respect to other bills that you are facing. So it becomes a very difficult situation. A lot of the people we see at the food bank are people that have jobs, but the inflation is beating them into the ground because the wages do not keep up. And then they end up on strike, so they're getting no pay. And the greed factor that goes on with companies is appalling because they're not working for the people, they're working for profits as the number one priority. And what we need to be doing as a civilization is working for people and helping people.
Yeah, it's sort of what I always imagined, that that's what we were supposed to be doing as a society, but yet somehow or another that has turned into, profit for my shareholders, as being the biggest priority. And Patricia was saying just a minute ago before we turn this on about how people on fixed income, like elderly couples and that sort of thing, and you were saying something about how their rent is being increased, and how does that happen, Murray or Patricia? Like, whoever wants to explain it.
Well, the rent increases are based on two things. One, if there's rent control, and one, if there's not rent control. If there is not rent control, then the landlord can increase it whatever he wants. If there's rent control, the city or government outlines how much specifically it can go up. Now, that can be a bit of a double-edged sword if the landlord's got some repairs that need to be done, and then they have to increase the rent. But the other side is sometimes landlords increase things for rent that don't need to be done. So it comes down to that greed factor again. What's in it for me? Not what's in it for you. What's the long-term benefit? Is there a long-term benefit? And this is where we need to create a balance and deal with the situation as it is, and understand that people just can't afford prices going up and wages not going up. And having excessive profits in a grocery store or an oil company is nothing short of obscene.
Right. Yeah, I certainly agree with that. So, if we stick with housing just for a second, since the show is called Let's Talk Housing, but the if we talk about housing, so we're in California, and California right now is certainly, for the last year, been there's been a big push on for these what are called ADUs, or additional dwelling units. People will put a backyard or a garden suite, or they'll add something to their property to allow them to have an additional unit that they can rent out, or whatever they're going to do with it. Right? Have you seen? Is that making any sort of an impact?
From what I've seen, it hasn't made much of an impact yet, and it's because of the government red tape in trying to get the permits to do it. That is a very
Sorry,
long
I'm laughing because
process.
that's exactly the same thing exactly the same thing in
You know,
Canada. It takes so long to get a permit that by the time they get the permit, the person has gone from feeling bad about not having an apartment to sliding down that slippery slope. Once you're out of your house, you're homeless, you're on the street, you're in a tent, you're distressed, depressed, you start taking drugs to feel whatever, and then you're gone.
that's it exactly. There's an apartment down the street that's been under construction for 10 years, still not finished, not permitted to be finalized at this point. It's still empty.
Yeah, and yet it's a potential of X number of units of housing.
8 units.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and that's only 8 units. Even.
Yeah, it's only 8 units. You want to renovate or rebuild a house, you have to keep one wall standing and then build around that one wall, or you face a boatload of additional paperwork and permits, which makes no sense at all. It needs to be streamlined because it could be done faster if we get down to actually getting the work done instead of being tied up in bureaucracy.
And I always struggle, and I'm in the business. I struggle with what takes so long. Like, okay, it's one thing. There are things that need to be done, right? Like you have to make
Absolutely.
sure that the zoning is right, that the building code is being met, that X, Y, and Z. You need, because you want the building to be safe. Here in LA, it's got to meet earthquake requirements, etc. Right? Engineering needs to be done, but all of that, I can tell you, it really doesn't take very long. Like, to analyze a piece of land and tell whether this building will work in that place is at most a 3 or 4 day job.
And there you get down to something like a black belt project of streamlining processes.
Yeah.
And a lot of major companies go through that process. Why isn't the planning department in cities going through that to reduce the time?
Yeah, in Canada, and I'm not sure, maybe you can tell me, but in Canada, the municipality controls the building permit and what's called the site permit, which is the permit that approves a type of building in a location. And then the municipality also is the one that approves building permits. And in Canada, anyway, both the provincial government and the federal government, to some extent, are trying to apply pressure somehow or another. But it just doesn't seem to happen. So I'm kind of dumbfounded by it.
Well, it's when you consider, here's a house, established house, it's all built, everything's fine. Now the owner wants to build an ADU, which can be prefab constructed. Now they need permits for everything, including a shower. That's a separate permit, apparently.
Well, luckily we don't have that, but I believe you here. A separate shower permit. Okay.
There's a case right now of a person that had a ADU built and they rented it out under Airbnb. The shower wasn't permitted, and now the person is refusing to pay rent and stayed on at the Airbnb because they didn't have the permit, so therefore don't have to pay rent. It's gone on for 540 days. It's in LA Times right now.
So everybody's taking advantage there. The person who's sitting in the apartment,
Yep.
who's kind of what do they call it?
Squatting.
Squatting, right? Squatting in the apartment, and because all the paperwork is such a mess. That
How long does it take to really have a prefab ADU installed on existing property with water lines and electricity and include flushing toilet, shower, and hook it up.
Yeah, but it doesn't take long, and if unfortunately this program is controlled by has rules presented by the CRTC in Canada, so I can't use the language that I would like to review why I think how ridiculous it is. It really, and I laugh at something that is truly not funny, because as I've said many times, and MJ was with me at the time, we were driving through Peterborough, and we just pulled into a Tim Hortons, and in this Tim Hortons is right in downtown Peterborough, and so there were some people who were obviously homeless, or certainly seemed that way, but then lying on the sidewalk right in front of the window of the Tim Hortons was a man who was probably looked like he was maybe 50, 55, and I could tell by looking, this was not somebody who was a criminal or was whatever, like undeserving. I don't even know what it is, because I think everybody is deserving of a home.
Mm-hmm.
But here he was lying, and I thought, my goodness, like, is this what it is now, that this guy probably just couldn't afford his rent? Something happened. We're all, but for the grace, we're all a very short period from not having the resources to pay everything, and it just seems ridiculous.
And that's what I see at the food bank. I see people that are literally crying because they now have to go to a food bank. They never thought they'd be in that situation, but they have run out of money, run out of opportunity, run out of the ability to be able to afford what they used to be able to afford. And it's very, very sad, and the numbers are increasing constantly.
Wow. So let me ask you the question I always like to ask. And Patricia, I know you're shy, but I'd like to hear your side of this too. And our other participant over here is really, in a nutshell, what do you think is a solution, or a couple of them? What do you think would work, that we could at least have a plan to turn things around?
Well, I think the government should start building places for citizens, people who retired and don't have the money to pay for rent, and making a small houses, not a big houses for them. And also, they should have put a control on these landlords that they rent these old people houses or apartments, and then suddenly they ask them, oh, well, you need to give your apartment that you pay $1,000 a month, because we're going to renovate and we're going to rent it for 3,500. Do you have the 3,500? You're welcome to stay, or you need to move. So people lose their house. They older people don't have the money. They have a income that is all very small amount.
That's one of the things where they many people, when they retire, if they haven't got some substantial savings, you end up retiring into poverty, and it just keeps getting worse, because even if you're on like a Canada pension plan, the amount that it goes up is not very much, and the amount of money you get is quite small. It's not enough to live in a larger city or in most communities anymore. It's kind of a fail safe, but now you're moving from your house to an apartment to a room.
Yeah. And barely that. And I agree. And we have the same thing, which we call, and you probably call it the same thing here, renovictions, right? Where someone is where they say, oh, we have to renovate, and then you'll have to leave. And then after they're gone, they, paint the walls, and then, oh, the cost of the rent is now $3,000 because they can get it. Or they'll find somebody, or whatever it's the market will bear. and it's it's in my mind it's criminal, and I just to reiterate what you were saying, Patricia, is that you feel that the government needs to step in and really start to be the leader in providing housing, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, Patricia's shy, and so, but that's okay. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just appreciate your opinion. And how about you, Murray? Do you have some other ideas on solutions?
It would come down to an aspect of morals and fairness and not being greedy. Do the right thing. If you have a tenant and they're a good tenant, why do you need to jack up the rent more and more? So you can do this and do that. How about understand that what goes around comes around?
Good
And
one.
it does.
Yeah.
And karma bites.
Yes, it does. And how about you? Would you like to offer a solution, ma'am? We have another participant. She can introduce herself if she's going to speak. Will you speak? Oh, no, she's going to make me have to cut this part out of the show. Okay, that's my charming wife who's sitting beside me. She does normally have lots of opinions about this, but today I think she's just in her holiday mood.
I was a landlord in Ontario for a number of years, about 10 years. And to me, it was either really good or really bad. And when we had good tenants, it was great. But if it wasn't a good tenant, as a landlord, you were always the bad guy. Didn't matter what you did, you were always the bad guy. They could complain about anything. You're off to the landlord tenant board. It went on and on. And all you want to do is try to make them happy, but you can't make everybody happy. So, what's the solution? The best solution is do the best you can for your tenant. They're your customer, they're the ones that are paying you. Do the best you can for them and
Yeah.
stop being greedy.
Yeah, and it is true, in all fairness, that sometimes people take advantage. Sometimes they do, but not all the time. And you can't
Absolutely.
take advantage of everybody because one person takes advantage. And certainly, like in Ontario now, the opportunity, like if you're a landlord and you want to evict somebody legitimately,
Mm-hmm.
it will be at least 8 to 12 months before you can even get a date in front of the tribunal.
Mm-hmm.
So that tenant can either go without paying rent for that whole time and stay where they are, or they can push you the money and keep paying you, but you can't physically do anything until that tribunal has been there. And it's to the point, and I had someone on a previous show who was also a landlord, and he talked about the idea that they call it cash for keys, and people will purposely, hang in and do what they're going to do, just like it sounds like this happening with this Airbnb person, to do that. But we have to keep in mind that one person doing the wrong thing doesn't give an excuse for everybody to do the wrong thing.
Exactly. Yeah, you see that, and there is that other aspect where people will hang on to get a payout from you. And I did have to pay a tenant to leave one time. That was causing a lot of damage, and that was better than waiting all the time. However, this is the exception to the rule. Most tenants are really good, but a lot of landlords are just in it for making as much money as they can. And I was never in it for that. That's not my character. I wanted to have the rent being paid so I could pay the mortgage and try and make the tenant as happy as I could.
And increase your asset value.
That was where the payoff as a landlord was that increased asset value over a period of time.
Yeah, which is fair. That's fair. And you should get that. And I agree 100%. Anyhow, any other comments or anything else that you want to add right now? We can talk again another time if you like.
No, this is good.
Okay, thank you very much. By the way, this is Murray, and Murray happens to be one of my oldest friends. Not that he's old. I mean that we have known each other for a long time, since we were teenagers, and there you go. And it's wonderful. Thank you very much, Murray.
Thank you very much, Steve.
For your time today. Okay. Hi, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about a recent study that was done by the Homelessness Hub. It's an organization, really interesting organization that talks about homelessness in our country, in Canada, and how it affects people, and what happens to it, and what happens. And in particular, they issued a study that was just released the 21st of September on the relationship between youth homelessness and child protective services. So the relationship between how homelessness affects children and how they then therefore become involved with child protective services in Canada. And additionally, to see how marginalized groups such as Indigenous people and LGBTQ and non-binary youth are also affected in even different ways. And really, it's very interesting how this all is put together. So if you want to read the whole report, just go to homelesshub.ca. That's HOMELESS hub.ca. That will cover, in Homeless Hub, you will find all sorts of information, but in particular, this link to this relationship between youth and protective homelessness and child protective services. So, just to give you some idea. So, just to set up some information to start with, right? So, out of the people surveyed, okay, and this was over 1,300 youth who of their experiences on homelessness across Canada. So that, with that in mind, they found that 61% that disclosed that they had dealt with CPS, with Child Protective Services, and out of that group, 21% were placed in foster care, 14% had resided in group homes, 28% experienced both foster care and group home placements, and 37% reported they had interactions with other protection services. And youth who were placed in care are particularly vulnerable to homelessness, as there is often little support provided for transitioning out of care. I mean, even in my own experience with people that I know who have dealt with foster care in particular, once you turn 18, it's thank you, bye, you're on your own. There isn't a great deal of information and help that's provided. 30% of the youth respondents reported they'd received some degree of support in transition planning while in care. The majority, 52%, reported not receiving any help in creating any sort of a plan for where they were going to go or support once they leave CPS care. Despite all of that vulnerability among the participants who engaged, only about 14% indicated that they knew whether the risk of homelessness was evaluated before leaving care. The majority, 49%, however, they were not aware of any assessment being conducted, while the rest of the participants were unsure. So 49% were not aware of any assessment, and 37% weren't sure. So the transition from care even happens at a younger age than what you might think. And I'll just read from the report here to give you an idea. On average, youth had their first contact with CPS around age 7. And if they were placed in care, they exited it at age 14. This likely contributes to the fact that kids who have been in care experienced homelessness at a younger age than the people who didn't have intervention from CPS. Then let's just talk a little bit about the kind of the demographics, and this is from the report as well, as basically all of this is going to be, is that the average age of the youth surveyed, these are people who are homeless, was 19. In terms of race, 63% of the group who had of the group who had intervention by Child Protective Services identified as white, 11.5% as black, 25.5% as racialized, and in terms of gender, 44% identified as women and 45% as men, with 1% identifying as something other. Over a third, 36.5%, identified as LGBTQ, while 11% specifically identifying as a gender minority. So, it's just amazing to see how many people who are already having a hard time, the hard time just keeps piling on. Adverse childhood experiences. It appears that many youth individuals who have had interactions with Child Protective Services and faced homelessness also had challenging childhoods. Well, that's in the report, but I gotta say, seems to make perfectly good sense to me. It is pretty straightforward research that research or common sense that individuals who've had Child Protective Services and face homelessness, also they had challenging childhoods. And in the survey or in the report, they assessed the difficulties on a scale from 0, no challenges, to 9, extremely challenging, with a higher score indicating a great number of childhood experiences. The adverse child experiences. The results indicate that the people who've had involvement with Child Protective Services had an average score of 4.78 on that score of 0 to 9, while the non-Child Protective Service group averaged 3.42 on that scale of 0 to 9. This certainly is basically the same. It's right. It aligns with the fact that people who have not had an experience with Child Protective Services group reported a higher quality of life. Imagine that if they don't interact with Child Protective Services, they have a better quality of life because they haven't had Child Protective Services. That's most likely because they haven't interacted or had challenges at home. This makes things, very clear. What does it mean? Let's support families to do a better job, find a way to help parents to understand how to work with their kids, how not to, how not to do things that will encourage CPS involvement. Again, it seems fairly straightforward that if you can help people to know how better to cope with having children, bringing them up, how to cope with their own problems that result in those traumas becoming intergenerational traumas, then that would make a big difference. In the report, the conclusion clearly says, and I'll read it for you. In conclusion, research has shown that a history of youth interaction with Child Protective Services has long-term impacts on young people's lives after leaving the Child Protective Service care, notably an increased risk of homelessness at a younger age. To combat this, prevention-focused strategies and programs should be, and I will add in, have to be, need to be, absolutely should be implemented, including transition planning, which, as I said earlier, they don't seem to be doing in any sort of consistent manner now. You're in Child Protective Services, you're aging out, but in the majority of cases, they don't help you to figure out how to live a life away. So you've been taken away from your parents for, okay, let's call it a good reason. You've been taken away. You've spent time perhaps in foster care or in a group home, and then you age out because the Child Protective Services only covers you to a certain age, depending on the province and the service. And then at that time, the majority of kids, they don't work out a plan to help them to transition. Therefore, a high majority of them end up homeless and on the street. And then the slippery slope begins into into drug addiction, into a depression, into mental illness, into everything that then puts them further and further, slides them further and further down. Now, these strategies, the important strategies are these, including transitional planning for leaving Child Protective Service, financial supports, building life skills, receiving support from social workers, as well reuniting youth with their families and helping them to reunite with their families. These strategies are important as they can reduce the long-term harm of Child Protective Service interaction and provide more stable housing opportunities so youth can thrive. Imagine that. If you provide support, youth will thrive. Again, where are we? Why are we not more aware of this? These are challenges that really we need to get on top of. Now, so far in my show, I have talked a lot about the homeless problem, about some of the things that can be done, but I also want to provide some things for people to do. So, however, in doing my own research to talk about here, I thought, okay, as I have heard, of course, there are organizations in the Peterborough area and in other municipalities across Ontario and across Canada that provide RGI type housing, rent geared to income. So these are usually done with a process where if you have a low income and you're looking for housing, is that housing supply is managed by a group, usually a not-for-profit organization such as United Way or Salvation Army or other not-for-profit organizations or charitable organizations that run rent or rent geared income housing facilities, which they could be different apartments, they could be transitional housing, they can be all sorts of different things. But at the same time, those buildings have to be built, they have to be supported,
And so and that money generally comes through government supplementation. Now, unfortunately, particularly in Ontario, that supplementation has virtually disappeared for a long, long time. So that what has happened is that the people who are providing this rent geared income housing, they don't have money to build new housing. It used to be that the government would provide money on an annual basis to build more rent geared to income. They haven't been doing that for a long time. And so what happens is you keep rotating the same units. Well, the need increases over and over. So what happens now? Higher need, same number of units, long wait list. So in Peterborough, rent geared to income, which you can apply, put your name on the register, just have to go to Google, put in rent geared to income for Peterborough. Then you can register, fill out all the forms, tell them all about you, and then you can get on the wait list. So, aren't you lucky? You get approved, you're on the wait list. Well, as of February 2020, and that's even prior to all of the latest round of increases, both in the number of people who are looking for housing as well as the cost of housing have gone up. So since 2020, at that point, the longest wait time was for a one-bedroom apartment, and it can take, you ready, 8 years or more on that list to be able to wait until somebody moves or dies in order to find a rent geared income type housing in Peterborough. So you can imagine if you don't have housing, you're waiting 8 years for that housing to show up. It's really unimaginable that this is what we need to put people through in order to whatever. I just don't get it. So, and my further research shows this average wait times across Ontario. So here's what it is. A studio for a senior. So a single senior studio means not a bedroom, just they're decent accommodation. Average time on wait list, 8 years. That's for a senior. So you're a senior, you got to wait 8 years to get rent geared to income. So rent that you can afford while you're on Canada Pension Plan. So by that time you're really a senior, or something's happened to you. A studio apartment for a regular person, not a senior, is 10 years. A one-bedroom apartment, that's the most in demand, 14 years on average for Ontario housing rent geared to income. 14 years. A two-bedroom, 13 years. It is absolutely astronomical and absolutely unfair that this is the type of situation that we're in. Obviously, there isn't, if the whole idea is that you have to qualify in order to be in rent geared for income, then obviously if the wait list is 14 years, that we need more of that accommodation, because more people, if you're qualifying them, then either your qualification stuff is wrong, meaning you're saying that, okay, you're qualifying a whole bunch of people who really don't deserve to have the rent geared to income, and therefore that makes the list longer, or you just don't have enough apartments or places to live. And I think that is the real answer.
All of this said, about rent geared for income, about youth, about what's happening here in California. Bottom line is that we continue on a virtual daily basis for our governments to not deal effectively, and the people and the companies to not deal effectively with housing crisis. As someone said, and you'll hear me repeat over and over again, someone said to me, when talking about homelessness, the cure for homelessness is homes. Seems obvious. I mean, many people will say, well, the people on the street, they need to pull up their socks. They need to, they need to get a job. There are lots of jobs out there. This, in my experience, and in many people's experience, is just not accurate. It's not that people are just lazy and don't want to work. Well, I shouldn't say that because sure, there are going to be people, but there's just like there are people who are going to be in jail and who are going to commit crimes because of whatever. But the percentage that are really people who really meet those things is truly quite small. The majority of people on the street and in bad shape home wise are people who are dealing with a variety of problems that can be solved and they are willing to solve them. It's up to us, the people, the citizens, the people in our country to work and to push the officials on municipal, provincial, federal government agencies to push them forward. That's one of the reasons why I participate and am willing to speak and talk at conferences such as what I'm at this time in California. This conference is the third one that I've participated in with this group in talking about modular housing and affordable housing. And in fact, the first conference I went to, I had suggested to the people who put on these conferences that they focus, instead of focusing just on modular housing, that they focus on affordable housing, or as I prefer to call it, again, you'll hear me say it many times, financially accessible. And in the weeks to come, we're going to be bringing in more. I have a number of interviews scheduled during the time that I'm in California with people here to talk about what California is doing to help people and to help to solve this problem faster. And then I have now tapped into some of my own um, LinkedIn resources to bring more people to talk about housing in general. But quite honestly, I need to have people who have lived experience also to bring their voices forward. So please, if you're listening out there, please feel free to contact me. My email's Steven, Steven, at haylestrom.com. And my cell phone is 647-390-9036. Please reach out, talk to me. I'd love to interview you. And what I'd really like to do at some point is in Peterborough, hopefully before the end of 2023, is to have um, an assembly, have invite people to come together as a group in an auditorium somewhere in the Peterborough area to come together and to talk about housing solutions. To put your hand up and first tell your story. What are you doing? How is it affecting you? And then to try to bring a panel of people together who can offer some solutions. There are unfortunately no instant answers. There's no way to snap my fingers and produce housing. Although, if somebody want to call me, I've sent emails to all of the people involved saying, hey, give me a call. I'll tell you a fast solution. And so far, if you know the expression, crickets, that's what I've gotten. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of action. And I purposely just emailed these government officials directly to their official email to see whether it would get any reaction. And there isn't any. So you either have to have somebody who you know who can talk, etc. But just using normal available resources just does not seem to work. Anyway, I can ramble on about that forever, and I'm not going to do it anymore. I want to set up this symposium in Peterborough, or this gathering of people to and regular press and everyone else, so that we can start to focus more and more on the problem, and to bring all of the different groups, all of the housing groups together, all of the homeless helping people together, all of them together into one group, and create some list of items that need to be dealt with and pushed forward. As I've said before, it's like the provincial government has a fast track system for permitting, but they only implement it for their own projects. Municipalities continue to drag their feet in approving new projects. They continue to monopolize or to maintain large amounts of property that are owned by municipalities, provincial governments, federal governments, and then not utilizing them to build housing on. As I said in my last episode, the provincial government has promised 8 years ago to build housing on federal land. Well, so far, in those 8 years, they've built 12 units. 12, yes. And so action on the part of individuals needs to be done in order to move things forward. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. We're just coming to the end of the program for this week. I appreciate all my listeners, and thank you very much for everything. It's really been a pleasure to be here again. And welcome to Wednesdays. Been moved. Hey, I'm happy to be here. Have a great day. Have a wonderful afternoon. And remember, reach out to me if you'd like to tell your story or tell your solution. Love to have you on my show. Thank you very much. Take care. This is Stephen Haylestrom signing off from 92.7 FM Peterborough Trent Radio. Glad to have you. Take care.